Summer means position weeks at Lettermen Row. We are kicking things off with the most important position on the field, the most important position, maybe in all of sports, and that is the quarterback position at Ohio State. Andy Backstrom in the middle of your screen, Tim May on the other side of your screen, and I am Spencer Holbrook. Fellas, let's talk quarterbacks. Who's going to be the quarterback? We don't know. Who's going to be the backup quarterback? We don't know. Which of the freshman quarterbacks shined in spring ball? We kind of know that. There's 5 of them. None of them left after spring football. How surprised? We'll just start there. Tim, start with you. How surprised were you that none of the 5 left after spring football?
I really am not surprised because they're all at different levels of their development. We talked about that during the spring. I mean, Lincoln Keenholz is a little bit ahead just from knowing the system, et cetera, wise than is the other in quotes, close quotes, whatever. I forgot my air quotes there. Freshman, the other 2 freshmen, Julian Sayin and Aaron Nolan. And Aaron Nolan, if he was thinking about leaving prior to the spring game, which a lot of people seem to think he was, I mean, he took his team to 2 straight touchdowns. Yeah, that's what Ryan Day covets in his quarterback is show me touchdowns. And then, of course, the top 2, why would either one of them leave? There's been no declaration that one is ahead of the other, at least publicly. I'm not even sure privately there's been a declaration, the way I understand it. So why would Will Howard and Devin Brown leave with a chance to run this particular offense in the sixth year of the Ryan Day era, right? 19, 20, 21, 22, yes. 23, 24. My point is, why would any of these guys leave? Because even the young guys will benefit from being in this system with Ryan Day and Chip Kelly as 2 of their mentors for another season, and then maybe strike out on your own if things don't go well.
Andy, were you surprised?
No, and it's kind of because the portal didn't demand it too in the spring. There just wasn't that talent pool that I felt like was dictating kind of the movement that you maybe would have expected based on the winter and how crazy that was. It just didn't seem reasonable that someone would need to enter in the spring and find a good destination. It just felt like it was just relatively mild in terms of the amount of movement we were seeing from top players entering the portal. And so I think a lot of teams felt set after spring of what they needed. And there were certainly some smaller additions made here and there. Of course, the Ohio State biggest name to leave was Dallin Hayden, Colorado adding him. But, so there were some additions made like that one, but for the most part, it was smaller players trying to find, some kind of role within a Power 4 team. And I just didn't really see that happening for this quarterback room when you talk about such an important position and so much time that these quarterbacks have. Even Lincoln Keenholz, he redshirted last year. That game was basically just experience that he got in the Cotton Bowl. He didn't use any eligibility last year. So even someone like him has a lot of time ahead of him.
Yeah, all of these guys, Will Howard has 1 year left. Devin Brown has 2. So those guys are kind of in a make or break situation here, but they both want to see that competition out. Like you said, the other guys all have 4 years left, which I think is the biggest thing here. Even still, I will be, I guess, alone in this. I was a little surprised. I mean, just carrying 5 quarterbacks in this day and age of college football is not easy. And I know that the portal produced small fish in a small pond in the spring portal window, but, it still did surprise me a little bit to not see really any quarterback movement around the country, let alone at Ohio State, where you've got 5 quarterbacks and only one of them is really going to be, the guy. And, as good as Julian Sayin looked in spring, and we'll talk about him, I thought that could have pushed one of those other guys down the depth chart out of the program, just kind of seeing the writing on the wall of like, okay, this guy's special. It didn't. And now the competition is great because you've got 2 layers of the competition. And I think that's where I go next. I'll start with you again, Andy, here. This competition is multifaceted because there's the competition at the top between Devin Brown and Will Howard as we see it right now as the top 2. And then there's that competition to be the next wave with Lincoln Keenholz and Aaron Nolan and Julian Sayin. I don't know. Have you seen a dynamic this interesting, Andy, of like 2 separate battles going on in the same quarterback room?
It's a really good position for Ryan Day to be in because you get the insurance policy. Like you needed to bring someone in after the Cotton Bowl, knowing the injury history of Devin Brown. You couldn't ride into the offseason without bringing in someone else. And so you bring in Will Howard, who could be the starter, but still competing with Devin Brown. And then it's a luxury to get Julian Sayin. And I think that was something that no one really expected. Ryan Day was even honest about that. Like, they didn't know he was going to be in the portal. Of course, Nick Saban retiring allowed that to happen. And now you have Julian Sayin in addition to Aaron Noland, and you have these luxury of riches, basically, to have 5 guys. I mean, think about last year. It was such an importance for them to have 4 scholarship quarterbacks. And the 4th was Tristan Gebbia, who was a quasi-graduate assistant, essentially, last year. And so to have 5 guys that are highly touted, high ceilings, and most of them have a lot of eligibility left. I think Devin Brown actually has 3 years remaining. And so you do have options now when you have this quarterback room. And I think that's what makes this competition so great, is that we don't really know who's leading. And I think last year you really had a 2-way race, whereas this year you can really see maybe even a 3-way race. And then beyond that, we don't even really know. You know, with Lincoln Kienholz, he didn't have a great spring game, but people still rave about his athleticism. So there's intrigue there. With Aaron Noland, he didn't have a great spring, but he looked pretty good in the spring game. So, like, there are these loose ends that give you optimism for every single one of these quarterbacks. And I think that's probably the most exciting thing about this room.
Yeah, the loose ends part of it is what intrigues me, is that that's why they're all still here. They have something to prove, even at Ohio State, all of them. And, the Will Howard thing, I mean, as soon as Kyle McCord opted to leave, Ohio State was big time in the market for a transfer quarterback. And, I remember standing there on the sidelines. I think it was you, Spencer, before the Cotton Bowl started. I was standing there with somebody going, when's Will Howard going to get here? And we were already expecting Will Howard to commit to Ohio State even before he did. So that movement was already well underway. So it's just an intriguing time, fellas, because I've been saying this on radio and TV shows I've been on, and maybe even my podcast, the Tim May Show, that everybody asked me going into the spring what was the most important question for them to answer. I still believe then and still believe now it's still who's the starting right guard. But they did not have a quarterback just jump out and grab the job in the spring either. Maybe they did from a standpoint. Maybe Devin Brown and Will Howard both looked impressive enough. We haven't gotten a final word on that. I'm hoping we get to talk to the coaches sooner rather than later, and like we did last year post-spring. But the bottom line is they didn't have anybody just jump out and take the job and run away with it. And people could say, well, it's urgent. It's Ryan Day by the second week of camp, or else, he learned his lesson last year and stuff. Well, you know what? If I'm Ryan Day and I'm in it, and that guy hasn't declared himself, meaning by his play, and by the way, his teammates are rallying around him, etc., by the second week of camp, I don't push that just because other people think that's the way to go. Ryan Day would like to have had that situation clean itself up by the end of camp last year, and it didn't. So he went with the more experienced of the 2 guys. He may end up doing the exact same thing this year, may declare that a little bit earlier, because Will Howard has started a couple of seasons at Kansas State. Devin Brown has started 1 game. So you could see him leaning that direction. But the fact that neither one of them went out and just took the job, that would be slightly concerning to me if I was Ryan Day or Chip Kelly at this moment.
I think it's interesting. I think it's a good point, Tim. But I also think that the language that Ryan Day was using this spring was a little different than what he used last spring, where he was really, really pushing that it didn't have to be decided. And we kind of almost thought that it was leaning toward them going into the season still with an open quarterback battle. I get the inkling that Ryan Day wants no part of that this time around. I think he wants to have that thing settled. And, whether somebody jumps out, I guess, remains to be the factor that says, like, hey, this thing is settled or not. But also, I think if you're Ryan Day, like, he does want this thing to be done so they can go into the season with a clear starting quarterback. And I know everybody says, well, that's just for week 1. And maybe that's true. Maybe it is just a week 1 starter. But also, Ryan Day named a week 1 starter last year, and we thought that the other guy was going to get a lot of playing time in week 1 and in week 2 and down the road. And then it didn't happen. So when he names a starter, he names a starter. I think that's kind of set in stone now.
But what else he said in the spring was they're going to need at least 3 because they anticipate playing a 16-game schedule minimum. They need at least 3. So they're going to you're going to see 3 guys play, I do believe, because they have a schedule perfect to bring guys along in. This isn't hurry up and get ready for Notre Dame. Oregon's down the road. Even Iowa is down the road. They're both in October. They have a chance to play with the schedule they've got. And that's not knocking who they're playing, but we all know who they're playing the first 3 games, including a bye week in there. Excuse me, an off week in there. So they have a perfect schedule, in my opinion, to bring along 3 quarterbacks because you may end up needing them, right, Anders?
Yeah, you got 2 bye weeks, actually, Tim. And so
the second one's after the Oregon game.
Right. And so you actually have some more options. I mean, the first one comes right after the Western Michigan game, and that's before the Marshall game. So, like, you have some time to play around with this if you want to get creative or if you feel like you need to make a switch early or whatever. And I know the history suggests that when Ryan Day picks a quarterback, he's picked his quarterback. I do wonder about last year, though. I mean, not that we really don't know about Devin Brown still. We really just don't have enough data to know. Certainly he's probably not at that point where you're like, okay, certifiably great ceiling, because if he had that, he probably would have beaten out Kyle McCord last year in the quarterback battle. So there are a lot of unknowns still, but it is a big what if for me that if he was available, like that Wisconsin game where Kyle McCord was basically limping, if Devin Brown was available for that game, would he have gone in? I mean, it's hard to know, and especially with the package they built in. And so it's not to say that Devin Brown's the answer. It's to say that maybe Ryan Day is more flexible with making a midseason change or putting someone else in there to give them the best chance to win a national championship. Because, maybe quarterback who starts in week 1 gives you a shot to go 11-1 or 12-0 even. But is that the quarterback that gives you the chance to win a 12-team college football playoff? And I think that's the main thing that Ryan Day is focused on. He's kind of hinted at throughout his comments during the spring is that they're trying to find the guy that gives them the best chance to win this whole thing. And with the defense that you have and with everything else you have with this staff, and even what Gene Smith talked about with going all in, I think that they all owe it to themselves to find the person at whatever point in this season that gives them the best chance to win this whole thing. And I think that's where it gets really interesting when you look at the schedule, you look at the bye weeks, you look at who they have on the roster. And so for me, who starts week 1 isn't necessarily who's starting in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I want to make sure people know that. I mean, that's looking stuff for my own benefit, but the Wisconsin game came after the Penn State game when Devin Brown suffered the high ankle sprain. So he wasn't available. The question was, why didn't Lincoln Keno's go? Remember last year when people were thinking Lincoln Keno's was the answer early in the year? I mean, I agree with everything you just said. I really think what really retarded the situation last year was Devin Brown's injury against Penn State, because we'd seen against Purdue, they had a package for him. And, Andy, you and I talked about that. So did Spence. They had a package for him. It looked like they were ready to expand it because they weren't getting it done the way they weren't getting the ball to the end zone to Ryan Day's liking. And then all of a sudden, Penn State, the first carry by Devin Brown, he suffers that high ankle sprain, extremely painful. And then he wasn't available basically the rest of the regular season. So, just when you have a plan, something screws it up. Kind of like in auto racing, when all of a sudden you get knocked into the wall.
Andy, what's the best ability?
Availability.
Okay, so this is how I look at this. And this is one of the things that I think is a layer of this quarterback competition that nobody will ever know, because we'll never be able to get into the mind of Ryan Day. If we could give him truth serum, there's plenty of questions we'd ask before this anyway. But in the back of Ryan Day's head, there's got to be at least a little bit of caution with Devin Brown, because he gave him every chance last spring to win that job against Kyle McCord and made sure that it was an open competition. And right before the spring game, when Devin Brown was going to be able to prove himself, he hurts his finger and can't play in the spring game. And I know that's a freak accident. And then he gave him a chance, early in the season, not really a chance once he declared Kyle McCord the starter, but then he starts to give him that chance in October against Penn State. And what happens? He hurts his ankle on really another freak accident where just You get caught in the pile, and it's one of the reasons coaches don't really like the quarterback sneak, because you can get caught in the pile and get your ankle twisted, and then you're out for 6 weeks. And then he finally gives him a chance in the Cotton Bowl. And what happens to Devin Brown? He goes out in the first quarter, and the game plan gets absolutely blown to bits because they prepared for a game plan around Devin Brown entirely. All of that is to say, there has to be at least a little bit of reservation with Devin Brown, only because, and it's not Devin's fault whatsoever, only because every time Devin has been given the chance, something freak accident has happened and he has gone down. And if you put a game plan in for Devin Brown and he gets hurt, and it looks like it did against Missouri, even with how talented Ohio State was on that day in the Cotton Bowl, what happens if you put a program in the hands of Devin Brown and he gets hurt? And like, that's all I'm saying. I'm not making the case against Devin Brown. That's not what I'm doing here. I just think that there's a layer to this where, like, the hesitation with Devin Brown has to come from a spot of, like, is he going to be available? Because the 3 opportunities that he's most had to show himself have resulted in injuries, not his own fault, but injuries that have slowed him down and given somebody else the reins instead of him. And I think that's something that we have to consider here, Tim.
Yeah, but I mean, I was going to say a bad word. Stuff happens, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, Devin Brown had never been injury prone at all through his career, through his high school, et cetera, career. Shows up at Ohio State, hurts his hand, finger before the spring game. Yeah. Then suffers the high ankle sprain after playing pretty well against Purdue in his time, in his extended time, really, against Purdue. Even had a touchdown pass in that game. You know, had one fumble he'd like to have back, but I thought played pretty well against Purdue. And now they're ready to rock and roll with that package against Penn State, and he suffers a high ankle sprain. I mean, who sees these coming? High ankle sprain on one leg, and then in the Cotton Bowl, when he finally comes back, high ankle sprain on the other leg. So you got to figure those are stronger than ever now, right? Those 2 legs. So what's going to pop next? I don't think you can think about it like that, because like Anders pointed out, I mean, Kyle McCord was hopping around on a bad ankle himself the last half of the year. You know, did we judge him properly based on that? I don't know. Bottom line was they didn't score touchdowns. I'm just telling you that I think the guy who proves in preseason camp that he can take the team down the field and score touchdowns is going to be the starting quarterback. And they can't willy-nilly and dilly-dally about that. I mean, they've got to give it to the guy who's producing. Devin Brown, according to Devin Brown and Ryan Day, one day, one day to the other in preseason camp last year, Devin Brown was the leader, and then Kyle McCord was the leader. It wasn't like Kyle McCord just inching away from him all the way. It was, according to both of them, that's what, because Ryan Day let them know where they stood from day to day. He was trying to create that competition. I think you're going to see the same thing in preseason camp. But like Andy, I think, pointed out, and maybe you did too, Spence, I get y'all 2 mixed up. Y'all are my twins. You got to accelerate that process, just because you've got this great football team, and you can't let the guy who's driving it be, average. That guy's got to stand out. You've got to find that guy that's going to stand out and gut feel go with him. But you got to play 2 other guys no matter what, because they have no proven depth at quarterback. After Will Howard, who some people still, some people like the way he played at Kansas State, but he had ups and downs and was inconsistent there. What's he really proven on a consistent basis? Right on down the line, there are question marks about this quarterback room, and mainly because you've got a transfer, like I said, who was a little bit inconsistent at Kansas State, but when he was good, he was really damn good, especially running the ball. And then you've got these other guys who haven't played in real college football. So it's going to be an interesting month of August.
Andy?
I think the beauty of it, Spencer, to your point about, like, you can't game plan around one guy. Well, I think the beauty of having Chip Kelly there and quarterback room, right, to have him piloting that whole operation, is that they want to have a system to function within the Ryan Day system where all the quarterbacks can do similar things. So let's say it was Devin Brown that got the nod, or even Will Howard. Whichever one of those, if they went down with an injury or they had to be pulled, the next guy could do similar things, not the same things. Like, I think Will Howard's a better athlete than Devin Brown, but functional mobility is there for all 5 of those quarterbacks in the room. And I would say probably the best athletes in that room are Will Howard and Lincoln Keenholz, but like that's not to say the other 3 can't run. I think they all can. And so you have guys with similar skill sets, and you have a quarterbacks coach and offense coordinator who knows how this thing works. And I think there was a reason why all 5 of them got a lot of work in the spring. And now it's going to be interesting to see how they split it up in training camp, because last year we saw a lot of that split field work where you had, parts of the first team offense working against parts of the second team defense. And then on the other field, you had other parts of the first team offense working against, so it was all mixed up. And I think that that's going to be interesting. Are they going to follow that same blueprint again? Because I think Ryan Day spoke highly of that plan because it got a lot of reps out of the way. But then we always were kind of concerned about, hey, is this slowing down the process of weeding out who is the top quarterback here? Because you're not getting the full first team offense. For instance, you have maybe the first team offensive line, but you'd be working with the second team or third team wide receivers. Or maybe you'd have the first team wide receivers, but not the first team offensive line, and you're facing more pressure. So I think that's, to Tim's point about accelerating this process and kind of getting an idea of who you actually have. I'm curious to see if they adopt that same split field mindset and approach to the training camp, because I'm not sure if they got the results they wanted from that last year.
Only 2 quarterbacks got a majority of first-team reps in the spring. Then there was a third who, as spring went on, began to get a few first-team reps sprinkled in here and there. It was freshman Julian Sayin. I wrote on Wednesday at lettermenrow.com the 3-step plan for Julian Sayin to compete for the starting quarterback job. Those 3 steps are, son, get yourself in the weight room. No quarterback at Ohio State has been as light as Julian Sayin is right now since Braxton Miller. I don't think Ryan Day would ever play a quarterback who is that light unless he was Braxton Miller. And then the second part of that process was, to continue to progress and show that he was an athlete. And the third step was just go win the job. And that is a big, big task for a true freshman. But we're going to end it on this because it's something that everyone wants to talk about with quarterback week. I put on our Letterman Lounge message board questions for quarterback week. A lot of them were about Julian Sayin because he's such a lightning rod in the fan base right now, almost like a glimmer of the future and a glimpse of what could be in the future. But if he were to be in the present, then you're talking about a whole new can of worms that we would have to open, and we'd probably have to do 22 minutes more of this show. So, Tim, we're
not going to? Go ahead.
No, we're not going to. I'm going to get a quick thought from you about it. Just like Julian Sayin as a potential wrench into this entire quarterback room, continuing to progress if he does. We've seen guys all the time. What Kai Stokes 2 years ago comes to mind. Malik Hartford last spring, and even he carried it a little bit into the fall, but then not really. Jelani Thurman last spring. There's a guy every year that kind of is that freshman breakout in the spring, and Julian Sayin was that guy this year. Do you think that he can carry that into the summer and actually push Will Howard and Devin Brown, or do you still think that this is just going to be a 2-man battle?
I'm pausing for effect. I'm telling you, I liked Aaron Noland in the spring game. I like how poised he was. I like how he found the open man and then threw him the ball. He was playing with lessers for the most part. He wasn't playing with the first team offensive line. And granted, they weren't going against the first team defense most of his time in there, et cetera. I think this is so interesting because Julian Sayin is the guy who really kind of it became the fly in the ointment for the Ohio State, not just the Ohio State coaches, but the Ohio State quarterbacks. Because, wait a minute, we're all set here. We signed Aaron Noland. He was one of the top-rated quarterbacks coming out of high school, et cetera. It's been committed to us for two years, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden, here comes Julian Sayin. But here's the thing. What I'm saying, pausing for effect, and laughter, is, and tomatoes, rotten tomatoes, is if a guy has got it, this day and age, you got to go with it. And everybody you talk to, we didn't get to see a whole lot of spring practice, let's be honest. But when we did, he seemed to throw the ball extremely well, except in the spring game. He seemed tentative. He was inconsistent. What he was seeing didn't seem to match up with what he thought he was going to be seeing from time to time on some of his passing plays. That's to be expected with a freshman going against a wily defense like Ohio State is putting on the field this year. But there is no doubting his arm talent. And just like there was, in my opinion, some others poo-pooed. I didn't poo-poo at all. First time I saw Quinn Ewers throw the football, I thought, man, this guy can throw the football, he said, pausing for effect again. But the bottom line is Julian Sayin can flat fling the ball. And Aaron Nolan has a different kind of pass, plus he's left-handed, but he's very accurate. At least he was in the spring game. So I think the competition is first to separate those two and then move on. Who's going to be that third quarterback? Well, those two, in my opinion, are the battle. I think Lincoln Keno still has ways to go in that realm.
Andy?
Yeah, I think that Julian is kind of already asserted himself as that third guy. And I think that the Spencer raise is a good one. Can you build on that in training camp? Is it just going to be this nice spring story that gives you maybe hope for what's next, the future of the quarterback room? Or is this something that is really special? He's got it now. He's just got that it factor. I think that the weight thing is certainly somewhat valid. I think the coaches said he's already added 15 pounds, and he's hovering around the 200-pound mark. Certainly you'd like him to be a little bit heavier, but it's not like he's out there playing defensive end. Like, if you can throw the football, you can throw the football. And I think he's got just as much velocity, if not more velocity, than any quarterback in that room right now. I thought he wasn't very impressive in the spring game, but the day before the spring game, I thought he wowed more than any of the other quarterbacks there. I mean, I remember we were all there watching. The high school coaches were there, and it was just like throw after throw. You were just like, okay, yeah, I see this. I understand why this is a big deal.
Keystone combo, freshman Keystone combo, Julian Sayin to Jeremiah Smith. You're exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, that was just you could just see it. And I think that, look at the schedule again. We mentioned the 2 byes. After the Oregon game, there's a gap between you play on October 12th against Oregon, you play October 26th against Nebraska. I'm not saying that's when you make a switch to Julian Sayin, but if you're going to make a change, that maybe is a time to do it. I don't know. You get a gap in the middle of the season. You have enough data from the guy who's probably started beforehand. Maybe you keep riding with whoever starts week 1, but I just would not rule it out. I mean, we've seen it happen before with these guys that are transcendent recruits. I think that the big thing for Julian is going to be processing. Is he a fast processor? And that's what Chip Kelly talked about after the spring game. He's a really fast processor. Now, can that continue? And can that continue in maybe in the game action we see him in? If they play all 3 quarterbacks, top 3 quarterbacks in the first couple of games, that's what I'm going to be looking for. How quick is he at getting the ball out? Does it look like the game is flying too fast for him? Is he still unafraid, like we saw him on Student Appreciation Day, throwing in the face of JT Tuimoloau? Or is he more tentative, like we saw at times in the spring game? Those are all key indicators if he has it right now. And I think we just have to see going forward if that's the case.
Yeah, I think these off weeks are going to be extremely interesting for the quarterback room. I just, like you said, you got to get a guy ready to play at Oregon. That's got to be, and then if that guy steps up and just plays big time, then he's the guy, right? I mean, that's the real. I mean, yes, Iowa's going to be a test, but at Oregon is going to be a huge harbinger of what this team is all about. And Ryan Day, I'm telling you, don't even have to talk to him about it. I know it just based on being around him for like many years now. He wants this offense going full gear this year. There were many times last year when they never got the top gear, and it bugged him to no end. So, and he knows, and we all know that who's driving this offense is going to make or break it, and because otherwise, it's loaded.
It is loaded, and we'll learn about that over the next 8 weeks as we continue with position group weeks at lettermenrow.com. We're going to be back on Friday with some predictions about the quarterback room, a couple different declarations we're going to make in the middle of May as we barrel through this offseason and almost into the preseason at this point. This is kind of position previews more than it is just outlooks, because it takes us, these 9 weeks takes us right into Big Ten Media Days in July, and then we go right into training camp, and then the season's here before you know it. Lettermen Row will be there every step of the way with the 41-year vet Tim, with Andy Backstrom in the middle of the screen, and me, Spencer Holbrook, Matt Parker, Alex Gleitman, and new Ohio State recruiting reporter Mick Walker over on the recruiting side. Loaded staff here at Lettermen Row. Come join us. $1 for your first 2 months when you use the code OSU1. That's right, $1 for your first 2 months when you use the code OSU1 at lettermenrow.com. You get 2 months covered. Takes you all the way into July, into Big Ten Media Days, where you don't want to miss a second of that coverage. Like I said, we'll be back on Friday to make some predictions about this quarterback room. It's a good one. We'll see what everybody thinks about it on Friday. We'll see you guys back here on Friday, and we'll see you guys over at lettermenrow.com.